Hello, everyone. Okay, so sorry that we're running a little bit late. We are going to go ahead and get started, though. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. This is the Red Zone panel event. Sorry. Technology is not our friend this evening. I apologize. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it, but this is also a care. Okay, you cannot. Perfect. So this care warning, just for everyone, we are going to be talking about sexual assault, sexual violence. If you are, triggered by anything that is going on, please feel free to remove yourself at any point. No harm, no foul. We will not ask questions. We understand that you all have your own experiences. So just wanted to share that first. And can you all hear me? Okay. Maybe it doesn't matter if I use the PowerPoint or not. Okay, so the agenda, just what we're going to be talking about, we're going to do a little welcome and introduce myself, because I'm Francesca Brandt. I did not say that at the beginning. I apologize. My name is Francesca Brandt. I'm the Assistant Director of Resolution and Engagement within the Dean of Students Office, and the Dean of Students Office is who is hosting tonight. So I can't even see it either, so this is good, sorry. So we'll do introductions, I'll introduce the panel members, and then we'll get into our question and answer. And if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to raise your hand, and you're in real life, so you can raise your hand, we'll call on you, and then you can ask your question. Or if you don't feel comfortable asking the question out loud, we have little pieces of paper that you can ask your questions on as well. Okay, I'm going to keep using the, maybe, sorry. Okay. Oh, I'm going backwards. Okay, sorry. You would have think that I have never done this before, so I'm just going to move over here. Okie dokie. So again, my name is Francesca Brandt. I'm the Assistant Director of Resolution and Engagement within the Dean of Students Office, and I'm your panel moderator for today. I already said about the questions, but if you have questions, raise your hand. We'll call on you, and you can write them down on the slip of paper as well. So first, we're going to talk about what is the red zone. That's why you all are here tonight. So the red zone refers to the period of time from the beginning of the fall semester to about Thanksgiving break when it's reported that the most sexual assaults occur on college campuses. So we are here doing programming, promoting awareness to that because not everybody knows about sexual assault. Not everybody knows what the red zone is. And we want to promote awareness to that, especially for those first time in college individuals as well. Sexual violence. Okay, I'm actually, since y'all cannot see this, I am just going to go through here and I'm going to introduce the panelists now. Sorry, we're going in a little bit different of an order. Okay, so we're going to start at the very end. Deputy Chief Adam Brown, if you will just go ahead and introduce yourself and you define your word, and then we'll go just down the table.
Hi, my name's Adam Brown. I'm the Deputy Chief at UPD. I spent, excuse me, that was a little loud. Spent 27 years at JSO and been here at UNF for about 6, and I'm very glad to be there, or to be here. And I owe you an apology. My word?
That is A-okay. Your word is sexual assault.
And
so if you'll just give us your definition of sexual assault.
Sure. And I'm glad you're giving me a chance to say what my definition of sexual assault is, because I need to make a distinction here. As the UPD, we have to go by Florida state statute. And Florida state statute is very specific as to what constitutes a sexual assault. When we are doing things on campus and providing services and reporting and things of that nature, it's a much wider array of things that can be considered sexual assault. But I think it's important for people to understand that we go by Florida state statute when we're doing a criminal investigation, because sometimes people will present to us and say that they were sexually assaulted, and when we look into it, it may be what we would consider a simple battery, and that's just because we have to go by Florida state statute. But what I have to go by the state statute for sexual battery is when you force, it's forced, I don't want to get too graphic here, but it's like forced penetration, one person by another without consent. And I'm just going to leave, I'm not going to go too deep into that, but that's what I have to go by is the statute.
Thank you. Tom, and your word is consent, just to.
I knew that, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Van Shore, and this is a little loud, isn't it? And I'm not sure how to turn it down. Anyway, I'm a student ombuds. I'm a person who's a confidential resource for students who helps them understand and navigate the policies and procedures of the university. My word is consent. Consent basically, in plain layman's terms, means agreement. But in terms of sexual conduct, what it really talks about is that prior to anything happening between two individuals, there's an agreement as to what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. But it also means that those two individuals are able to give their consent. If you're incapacitated because of alcohol or drugs, you can't give consent. If you're incapacitated because of a disability or because of age, you can't give consent. And if you're being manipulated, forced, coerced, blackmailed, you really freely can't give consent, because consent needs to be freely, actively, enthusiastically, unambiguously given, and it needs to be verbalized. So those are some of the basics of what consent means in this context.
Thank you, Whitney.
Hello, I'm Whitney Washington. I serve as the on-call advocate for the university. I am currently serving as a nonprofit manager who provides services to youth who has experienced human trafficking. My word is trauma. I think trauma is anything that takes someone off balance. So any distress or disturbing event that someone is not able to recover from.
Thank you, Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Sullivan. I don't know if it's on. Should I just keep talking?
Oh.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Emily Sullivan. I'm a student here at UNF. I serve as the student body vice president. I'm also the president of my sorority Alpha Phi, and I am the president of the sport management club. And my word is permission. I said to agree to something you would like to be a part of or do through verbal or written communication.
Thank you, Oscar.
Hi, I'm Oscar Berry. I'm a junior on the men's basketball team here. My word is sober, and that's the state of being in which no drugs or alcohol affects one's decision making.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay, can you hear me now? I don't want to yell at anybody. I have a tendency to yell. I'm Amy Howell. I'm one of the women's health nurse practitioners in the student health clinic. I've been here for about 8 years. I knew what the red zone was before it was defined as the red zone. We would see a lot more assaults come into the clinic, so I've been very happy to be a part of this event for 3 years. It's grown and changed and morphed, and a lot of things I wanted it to be, it's become. You've really focused on prevention. You've gotten lots of campus involvement, so I'm very happy to be a part of this. I'm going to do 2 words because I'm here also for my partner, Dr. Baker Townsend, who had to miss. She's not feeling well. Her word was dating violence, which I kind of want to just lump it in with mine, because mine was domestic violence, which, my patients are college students, so they're not typically living with their partners. So the term I prefer to use is intimate partner violence. I think that people can relate to that term quite a bit more, and that's the same as dating violence. And really that is any kind of physical, sexual, emotional abuse that happens within a relationship. It can also entail financial manipulation and control. So anything where there is a power differential in the setting of abuse.
Thank you, Alana.
Hi, my name is Alana Rollins, and I'm a counselor at the UNF Counseling Center. Prior to this, I did 2 years as a victim advocate for the state attorney's office, so a lot of this stuff is very familiar to me. And my word to define is abuse, and I would consider that as cruel, violent, or unfair treatment of someone, often happening repeatedly, and that can result in lasting effects.
Thank you. And Tyler.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Aldinger. I am the Associate Director for the UNF Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. One of the reasons why I think it's so important for myself to be here as well is Greek life in general has a high population of students that often face issues with sexual assault and sexual violence. So I really want to thank everyone in Dean of Students Office for letting me be a part of this. My word is harassment, and really harassment is aggressive acts of pressure or intimidation. This could be anything that makes someone feel humiliated, threatened, offended, anything like that. So yeah, that's my word.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with the questions. Our first question is directed towards Amy, Emily, and Tom. So how do we have meaningful conversations around trauma?
I'm not sure who wants to start. Any of the above?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Want
go
to- Let me backtrack a little bit and just say trauma is really something that disrupts your equilibrium. It changes your perceptions of the world. It affects everybody differently. But it takes a while for anybody to work through it, if they can, in fact, work through it. So I think the number one thing is if you're having a conversation with somebody about the trauma they've experienced, the number one thing you can do is just listen to them. Never deny their experience, never deny their feelings. Don't distort what happened to them. Just patiently listen, be there for them, be a sounding board for them. Accept what they're saying. Let them just talk.
I can follow that. I liked what Mr. Tom said about listening. I feel like trauma conversations used to be a taboo topic where it's something that you wouldn't bring up because it made people uncomfortable, and I've noticed throughout the past couple of years that it is more kind of socially acceptable in society. So when you're listening to someone that has felt comfortable enough to open up about these conversations, to listen, like he said, not to invalidate their feelings and not to give advice. You don't have to put your own personal experiences in because it's their time to talk.
So I'll take the other side of that, a victim that comes in and needs health care, but really doesn't want to talk about what has happened to them and is not ready to begin to process their trauma. You need to leave space, provide resources, but it's really important that at some point we begin to do that work, because another thing that I see in my practice is when there is unresolved trauma, that rears its head in lots of ugly ways that you aren't expecting. It pollutes future relationships. It can cause all kinds of mental health issues, substance abuse, suicidal thoughts and ideations, thoughts of harming self. So it's important to listen and give time to process, but also to encourage that process so that we begin to talk about and heal the trauma.
Thank you. Thank you all. Our next question is directed towards Tyler. What populations are more susceptible to sexual assault?
So from most of the studies and reports that have been, reported to agencies, different outlets, young women are, especially between the ages of 16 and 24, are especially susceptible to sexual violence and sexual assault. College-aged women are statistically 3 times more likely to experience some sort of sexual assault or rape than women in other age demographics. So we've seen that group of people is definitely one that definitely experiences high levels of sexual assault and sexual violence. Also, almost all, it's actually 94% of women who have been reported that they have been sexually assaulted, raped, have experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome, and also have had higher thoughts of suicide and attempted suicide. So young women are definitely a very susceptible, population demographic to sexual assault.
Thank you. And these questions are directed towards individuals, but everyone is able to answer. Don't feel that you can't because your name was not mentioned. Yeah. So our next question is directed towards Amy and Alana. My friend has been behaving differently. What are specific behaviors and signals to look for?
Things that come up for me are maybe withdrawal, changes in behaviors, things they may have been involved in that they are no longer choosing to become involved in. It could be changes in appetite, changing in hygienic behaviors, however you want to say that. I would also say like being fearful around certain people, reactive to certain situations. Some people may feel uncomfortable with closeness or kind of personal touch, that kind of thing. Definitely, as others have said, you know, suicidal ideation, poor self-image, kind of. And then, like as Amy mentioned earlier, increased drug and alcohol use, just some things to look for.
And she actually ticked off everything in my brain. I thought she was going to not hit the excess drug and alcohol abuse, but then she got it at the end. So I think that was a great answer. I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Our next question is directed towards Oscar and Emily. What are ways to go out in public or to a social gathering and stay safe?
I think a good rule is to go out in groups, not just general groups, but with trusted groups, because at the end of the day, when you're going out, you're responsible for them, and they're responsible for you. I think a great rule is whoever you go out with is who you come home with. And it's also, you have to be conscious of yourself. You can't be the one that everyone's worried about. So don't put yourself in that situation where everyone is so worried about you.
I like the response of who you go out with, you should go home with. You go out to have fun. You go out to just like be with friends, do new experiences. So you shouldn't be scared all the time, but there should be things in the back of your mind. So getting in the habit of little things like if you're at a function that might have drinks, putting your hand over your cup, just those small little habits to help prevent it. Nothing's impossible to do. So things will happen. So having those prevention items that just are in the back of your mind so you're not scared when you go out, but it's something that can prevent it. And then being there for your friends if you go out in a group of 4, maybe having someone, if you're all of age to drink, maybe having someone that doesn't drink that night just to make sure you have a ride or everyone's safe, especially when you go out downtown or just so you have someone that's there for the group. But I think it's important to just have an action plan before you go out with your friends.
Yeah, both you and Adam, please.
I just wanted to add a couple of things while we're talking about date rape drugs. I usually recommend that go out in groups, make a plan to come back, go out with people that care about whether or not you make it home. If you put your drink down and go to the bathroom, it's not yours anymore. I prefer you open it yourself or get it from a server, but if that can't be, I sometimes recommend that you take like a cup with a lid. If you've had one drink and feel very drunk, you need to get somewhere safe. Okay, so just those little things I wanted to add.
I was going to add that, but I also, just a couple of other things. We talked about the buddy system without using that word, but I like to, excuse me, to say use the buddy system. Just like Oscar said, who you leave with is who you come home with. Emily made a great point about having someone stay sober, and I would just expound a little bit on that. Not only stay sober, but stay alert and watch and look for weird behaviors. If something feels weird, act on it. If you see somebody getting one of your friends off to the side and trying to isolate that person from the group, that's a red flag, and you'd watch that. Someone maybe taking that person outside if you're at a bar or a restaurant or something where there's not a lot of, I think it went off, but I'll just speak more loudly, where there's not a lot of surveillance or cover. You know, you want to keep your eye on your friend and always have a plan. Even if you can't go out with a group, if you're going to go out, maybe you tell your friends, okay, I'm going out with this person, I'm going to this location, I plan to be home by this time, do me a favor, call me halfway in and check on me, see if I'm okay. Those are all ways that, that you can stay safe. I can't emphasize enough about protecting the drinks. Those are great comments also. But it sounds very basic, but people, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to later that said something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. If something doesn't feel right, they need to pay attention to that and speak up. And there is safety in numbers.
I think there's also a misconception that most most of the time when we're doing call outs or like responding to student survivors who have been assaulted, is actually happening in some form of their residence. So it's also important to be mindful of who you're bringing into your spaces. A lot of the sexual violence is alcohol or drug facilitated, but often it happens from a Netflix and chill that turns into bundling, that turns into digital battery or sexual battery. So it's not only happening when you go out, it's also who you are inviting into your spaces, and friends who invite other friends into their spaces as well. So that's often something that you should also be mindful for.
I don't want to filibuster, but things just keep coming up. Also, if you're going to go out with somebody for the first time, check them out. Look and see if they don't have a social media presence, they're probably giving you a fake name. I can't tell you how many people have come into the UPD and sat down with us for interviews and said they went out with someone and there was nothing at all on social media. They didn't know who they were. So it's very easy to do your homework and try to figure out who it is that you're going out with. And yeah, I would not do the Netflix and chill for a first date. I'd go somewhere where you're going to be in public and it's well lit and you're going to have a lot of people around.
That was actually going to be a follow-up question.
Oh,
is
sorry.
For me, so dating apps are very prevalent nowadays. What are y'all's thoughts on how to meet that person who's on the other end of the dating app? How to go about meeting up with them?
Well, just like I said, excuse me, you want to go out in public. You don't want to go to isolated areas with somebody that you don't know. You want to do your homework and really look at, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but you want to see if there's a social media presence. If there's like a real sketchy presence, that's bad. But if there's no presence at all, that's probably a red flag as well. Because these days, I'm even on there. So, and that's saying something. So, the more public you can be with the most people around, monitor the drug and alcohol intake. Those are good ways to keep yourself safe. And I want to make it very clear that by talking about some of these behaviors that you can avoid, this isn't blaming anyone who ends up becoming a victim of one of these crimes. It's not an intent to blame, it's an intent to educate.
Okay.
I would also, sorry, that was loud. I would also add about like safety planning with friends and loved ones. So like this expectation of, everyone has locations nowadays. Like I have your location. I expect to check in with you. I expect to hear from you at the end of the night. Like what can we do kind of to make sure that this ends in a good way?
That's exactly what I was going to say. If you're going out with someone for the first time or you've met them in passing at like a coffee bar, it's doing the buddy system. You can't necessarily bring your friend on a date. That might be a little odd. But saying, hey, this is where I'm going. I should be back by this time. Then you just have like an accountability to say you're going to be home at 4 and it's 6:30. Someone can start to worry for you.
And I think most of the times also, I think it's the first time you're meeting someone or you haven't met someone. Most of the time that date isn't going to be candlelight dinner or something serious. So, I would always, if you're especially on a dating app, maybe suggest to them about doing something that's a group activity. Like you said, a lot of the times, some of these accounts aren't even real people. They're either like bot accounts or stuff like that. Or, like you said, it just helps, going off what Emily said, just having that buddy system and planning something that you'll be out with a lot of group of people that you can kind of turn into a group activity that you're not going to find yourself alone, potentially with somebody. So.
I actually want to follow up with that. I've had situations and heard of stories where the other person may make you feel bad for that, like, oh, why does your friend have to come, or why does, this, and this. So if they really are interested in you and wanting to get to know you, they're going to understand that this is kind of awkward. We don't really know each other, so they should be open to that. So kind of being wary if anyone kind of makes you feel shamed or like you should be able to meet up with them in person privately.
Awesome. Thank you. And we did have a question come in. So Whitney, you mentioned the word or the term digital battery. What exactly does that mean?
So Adam was talking earlier about like different versions of sexual assault, and sexual assault is an umbrella term, but most times people say we're sexually assaulted and they talk about rape. Well, the legal term from the Florida statutes is called sexual battery. Under sexual battery, there's two types of penetration: digital, which is your fingers, and then genitalia penetration, as in sex organs or different things like that. So digital battery, digital sexual battery is like fingering, basically. Sorry, y'all.
Thank you. No, thank you. Our next question is directed towards Whitney and Tom. Who would be considered a confidential resource, and how do we access that person?
You want to start?
Sure. So the Victims Advocate is a confidential resource. The Student Health Center is a confidential resource. The Counseling Center is a confidential resource. And the Student Ombudsman is a confidential resource.
So I'm going to add one more, and I'm going to put a caveat on one of those. A clergy person is also a confidential resource. I am not a confidential resource for sexual assault. In the state of Florida, there's a legislation that says that the ombudsman on college campuses need to report sexual assault, sexual harassment when it occurs. In the other 49 states, for the most part, an ombudsman would be a confidential resource.
But all of those, excluding the ombudsman, all of those individuals, the Student Health Center, Counseling Center, the Victims Advocate, all of those, if you decide to share or disclose that you have been a victim or someone you know who have been a victim of sexual violence, they all know what to do for you and how to help you.
Thank you. And so of all of those people who you mentioned, how do we contact them? How do we get in touch with them?
So for the Victims Advocacy Program, the crisis helpline number should be on the back of your ID. The number is 904-620-1010. You could call that number at any time, and you could access victims advocacy services. For student health,
So I can take student health, and we are a confidential resource. You can come in and get health care and access to resources without necessarily reporting to campus police. You don't have to do that. You can do that, and we'll facilitate that, but we're also probably going to call Ms. Whitney. So you will do STI testing or whatever it is that you need. We can facilitate a forensic exam downtown if that's also what you need. But you would make an appointment either with the phone number, which I can just say that, 904-620-2900. You can also make an appointment on the patient portal online and self-schedule an appointment. And preferably with Women's Health, just so you'll get with myself or Dr. Baker Townsend, and we'll have a little bit of extra time for you.
So the Counseling Center is available 24/7 by calling their number 904-620-2602, regardless of, like I said, 24/7, any time of day or night. What's also nice is the Counseling Center is opposite the Victims Advocacy Office in Building 2. So if you stopped to visit the Victim Advocate, they could, if you wanted them to, walk you across the hall to the Counseling Center, or you could walk in on your own for that matter. Again, my office, I have to report, but I can report in ways that still leave the person in control of what their experience is.
Thank you. Our next question is directed towards Deputy Chief Adam Brown. I have heard the term CSA. What exactly does this mean?
A CSA is a Campus Security Authority, and any college or university in the United States that receives federal funding has to abide by what's called the Clery Act. The Clery Act dictates the way that we report crimes, we count crimes, we inform the campus community of what's going on. Part of that is the Clery Act requires us to have CSAs. The CSAs are defined by the individual university, but here on campus, just some examples. People in housing are all CSAs. All UPD are going to be CSAs, safety rangers, environmental health and safety people, housing, residence, life. Those are just some examples of CSAs. So a CSA is bound if they become aware that there was one of the Clary reportable crimes, like a arson, sexual assault, burglary, robbery, those type of crimes. They are and they occurred on our campus geography. They are required to report that. In addition to CSAs, then we have responsible. Oh, now I can't remember the term.
Responsible employees?
Responsible employees, thank you. And that's any faculty or staff member at UNF is responsible if they become aware of a sexual misconduct complaint. They have to forward that information to the Title IX office, and then that goes through it gets the machine going as far as responding to that. But those are just people that are responsible. If they become aware, they are responsible to report. And just a little bit, you heard before they were talking a little bit about reporting anonymously. You as a victim of sexual assault, you have the right, if you want to report it, we have to count. When I say we, I'm responsible for doing the annual security report where we count crimes. We would count that a sexual assault occurred on campus, but you do not have to speak to the police, and you do not have to provide the police with your name or any specific information. It is enough that you say, I was sexually assaulted, it occurred on campus, and I want it documented, and that will happen, but your anonymity is protected.
Thank you. Our next question is for Alana and Adam. How do we report a sexual assault, and what prevents people from reporting?
I'll just start with the police side of it. You can call 911 and report it, or you can call the non-emergency number, which is 904-620-2800. It's important for people to know that if they report by phone, if they call 911 from a cell phone here on campus, it does not go directly to UPD. It first goes to JSO, then they route the call to us. That's important for people to know because there's a little bit of lag time. It's not a lot. So you can report by phone. You can call in and ask to have an officer to respond to your area and take a report. People have walked into the station to say that they wanted to report a sexual battery, and we'll take that report. You can even I've had emails come to me that people didn't know what to do, and so an email will come to me, and I try to just very gently reach out and see if you want police involvement or if you would like other people to contact. And as far as what holds people back, I think there's a few things. I mean, I understand that some people are hesitant to talk to the police. We get it. We know that not everybody is going to be comfortable coming in and talking to a law enforcement officer in uniform. So sometimes that may hold people back. I also believe that in some people's minds, they think there's going to be a stigma. They're embarrassed. They don't want to, some people don't want their parents to find out what they've gone through. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I was kind of preparing for this last night and finding some things online, and it does appear that the Dean of Students office has like a report to Title IX, like you just kind of push a button, fill some things out, and I think there's also similar thing with like the Victim Advocacy Center, like reporting an incident. So if like you don't even want to make contact with anyone, you can just do it that way. We've had people come to the counseling center because they're not sure where to go. We've had professors bring them, and then we can kind of talk to you, see what's going on, and take you to the Victim Advocacy Program. We could take you to UPD. We can facilitate that. I also would like to say, like, especially like incoming freshmen, they may not be that aware of departments on campus. Like a lot of times, okay, you've maybe seen your freshman advisor a few times. Go to them, and they can point you in the right direction. Really just go somewhere that you feel safe and feel like you can be heard, whatever that may look like. And then some things that I felt like came up when it comes to what's preventing people from reporting. One of the things, of course, is always like the shame, the fear, I did something wrong, this was my fault, I should have said something, or you know, this was my fault. It could also be pressure from family, friends. Like, again, kind of what Adam was saying, the stigma. You don't want to be one of those people, or what is that going to do to their life? You know, it was just a mistake. And then one thing that was coming up for me was kind of like a lot of the times, I think one of the most, if it's a common statistic, that abuse, especially sexual abuse, can come from someone you know, from a family member. It could be from your own intimate partner. So it's like there's no way that was sexual assault or in a partnership. Like, sexual intimacy is something that's expected, even if, you know, I didn't want to do this or I felt pressured. It's normal. It's accepted. I just have to deal with that. So that idea, like going back to what I believe Tom said about consent, like the enthusiastic, like it has to be vocal. So that's kind of what was coming up for me.
I think there's also some fear of loss or change in one's social circle when everyone is friends and you're making this accusation. You know, it's not necessarily, sometimes you get pressure from that group of people that, oh, did that really happen? Or are you sure it happened the way you thought it did? Or they maybe take sides. I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes victims don't report, unfortunately, in the college setting.
Absolutely, and just to go off of that, how many things have we seen on media where it's like, you know, we get this sob story of the abuser of, oh, well, he was this athlete, and oh, he had this great bright future. So I imagine that could be also deterring to come forward because, well, their kind of future means more than what's happened to me.
So how can we fix that?
You can start by listening, making resources available. Just, I hate to go back a question, but you can also come to student health to report that you've been assaulted. And that's a good place to access the system. We will call the victim advocate. We'll call campus police if you want. But I think that's really, yeah. So start by listening. That's how we start to. And I like the fact that this conversation over the past 3 years has become more, rather than, you know, and we're going to get to some really good questions, so I don't want to jump ahead. But rather than being like perpetrator and victim, sometimes these things happen within relationships, and there's toxicity on both sides. It doesn't mean it's not abuse. It also doesn't mean that. I think there's a lot of layers, and we need to not think of like someone twirling their mustache and dragging somebody into the stairwell, because a lot of times that is not what it looks like.
Yeah. And I also think, like, when it comes to, there's no way that we could truly reduce people not wanting to report. What we can do is allow them to share their stories on their own terms, talk to them about their options, because ultimately it's up to them to decide what they do with their story and the events. And even when they speak with, like, detectives, they're gonna, like, I'm gonna take all this information. And some people are hesitant, but they work with them. They kind of explain the process and different things. However, they still let them know, like, you're driving this case. If there's, they talk to them about, like, the process, but it's still ultimately up to the person that they're working with to move that criminal case forward. Or if you're with the Title IX process, it's up to you to, like, put in a formal complaint. So ultimately, like, we have to have all of the resources. So this is good. You can let them know their options and provide them with their options and be there to support them. But there's no way to reduce the lack of reporting because it's agency. Survivors have agency to decide what they do to their story. You could serve as that lighthouse to be there for them while they're going through it, but they still have agency to do what they want.
Thank you. And I have a couple questions that came in, but one of them that directly relates to what we're talking about. What happens after I report? So say I report to UPD or Student Health Services, what happens next?
Well, if you come to student health, we'll first listen, assess if you need any health care, because we want to kind of stabilize first. And then depending on what you need or don't need, we'll make a plan. If you want the victim advocate, I call Whitney Washington. If you want to make a report to campus police, we call campus police. So that's kind of how you access the system through student health, at least.
As far as on the police side, if you decide that you want to make a report to us, of course we have to start gathering information. We're going to have to ask some questions. If there's any physical evidence, we will start collecting physical evidence. It could be bedding or clothing or things of that nature. We also, one of the first things that I make sure when I find out that there's been a sexual assault I want to know if they've called Whitney's office, if we've got a victim advocate coming, because I don't want the survivor's only contact to be with law enforcement. I want to have someone else there that can help. But we are going to have to ask the questions, the who, what, where, when, and why, those kind of questions, and start documenting things. And then after that initial report is taken and the dust settles, that's when we settle down and we start an investigation.
And they're very gentle with their questionings and everything. And like they have Detective Heather and Hal. So I think those are the only two detectives. So they're very good with like sexual assault, forensic interviews. As after reporting, if there's a sexual violence, most survivors have 5 days to get a forensic exam. And that forensic exam go along with that evidence. It's free of charge. It's a full body head to toe exam. That evidence is collected and stored at the Safe Center downtown. If the person decides to go on with their investigation, someone from UPD typically picks up that forensic information and takes it to the FDLE, and then they store it. But the survivor who needs medical advocacy have 5 days to get the forensic exam. If you decide to report, I think it's always good to have a forensic exam so you can have more evidence, but you also get treated for STIs, STDs, and different things like that. And then 2 weeks later, student health will follow up with you for additional testing.
And I will add, just from an evidence collection perspective, it's best if you're going to go that route to go sooner rather than later. If possible, don't take a shower, don't change your clothes, don't wash your bedding, those type of things, so that we can gather as much evidence as possible.
And then along with, I would definitely second the don't shower if possible, which sounds horrible to a survivor, but it does help with evidence. Also, along with testing and treating preemptively for sexually transmitted infections, you'll also be offered emergency contraception, which is just extra layer of help.
I want to add in there, though, too, because right now the conversation has been about reporting to the police. On campus, the other place that we would typically report to as a responsible employee is the Equal Opportunity and Inclusion Office, which is also the Title IX office. And the person would meet with them, and they would decide or help them decide whether or not they want to pursue it, either through the police or through the Student Conduct Office, because we can do it either way on campus. But the one thing I want to make clear is a lot of times when someone comes forward and says, I've been sexually assaulted, at first they might not want to pursue it. They're still trying to sort things out. They're still trying to figure out what happened. They're still, all those reasons that people said that they might not want to report. That doesn't have to happen immediately if you're going the conduct route or if you're going the EOI route. That investigation can take place at any time later on, but again, it's at the victim's discretion as to what happens. The report's made, but if they choose not to pursue it, they don't have to. But if they want to wait 2 months or 3 months, which is not unusual, they can do that.
Thank you. And Whitney, you mentioned a forensic exam. Can you elaborate a little bit on what exactly that means or what that entails?
So that is a sexual assault exam that typically is given after someone who has experienced sexual battery. And sexual battery is like the layman's term for rape. It has to be some form of penetration digitally or with some genitalia. They do a head-to-toe examination collecting DNA from anything that could have gotten DNA on it. So if, like, you scratched the perpetrator or the perpetrator kissed on your neck or your chest area, they could get DNA from any of those areas as well as your pelvic area. So that is what is typically collected during a forensic exam. They also give you HIV and STD medications. For the HIV medication, it has to be within 72 hours from the sexual assault. So some of those things, that's why it's important to get that exam early, because some of those things are on the timeline.
Thank you. Our next question that came in is, we keep using this word confidential. What exactly does confidential mean? Isn't that covered by FERPA?
So health information is covered by HIPAA. So educational records are covered by FERPA. So we have a little bit of a, gray area with both here on campus, but your medical records here on campus are absolutely protected and not part of any, they are locked down. No one can have them without your express written consent.
For me, the confidential and in the work that we do, if you're not planning to harm yourself or others, everything that we talk about is between me and you. So that what it looks like for the Victims Advocacy Program.
Yeah. For me too, it would be, again, I have to report, I'm a responsible employee, but I do not keep records for the university. I keep very terse statistical data, that's about it. So if you came in to talk to me, I would indicate that a person came in and said that they had been sexually assaulted, but nobody else would know who that was or what that was, except the fact that I need to report it to the EOI office. And at that point, the EOI office would contact the individual to see how they wanted to pursue it.
And on police reports, sexual assault, on a police report, it's called a victim. I don't like that term. You'll hear me say survivor, but the police report, the victim info is confidential. So there's no worry of that being released. And even if it was not a sexual assault, as the incident type, we have a thing called Marcy's Law, and any victim, it doesn't matter, you could get a scratch on your car. If you want to invoke Marcy's Law, we protect the victim information.
What is Marcy's Law?
It's just that, as a victim, you can ask to have your information withheld. So those are those reports that may be frustrating to some people to read, where everything's blacked out. Even you won't see names, dates of birth, pronouns, addresses, any of that. That's because of Marcy's Law.
Thank you. Our next question that came in is, how can we learn more about the red zone?
There are several different opportunities to learn about the red zone that you guys are hosting. You could probably answer this better than me, but there's the panel, there's a seminar. When was the seminar?
The bystander intervention training is Thursday, September 28th.
You go ahead.
And then we are doing a talking series as well, Tuesday, September 19th in the Student Union. Okay.
And actually, if you look up the red zone, you'll see that this is not just a UNF thing. This is across, many campuses and growing. We're not the only, college campus with this problem. It's actually not just a college problem, but this has been a really, great way to start to address it.
Thank you. What do our students think about how to get other students involved in the conversation? How can we strengthen our peer-to-peer awareness? That might be more directed towards Emily and Oscar's.
Can you say the question just one more time?
Absolutely. What do you think about how to get other students involved in this conversation? It was kind of a two-part.
I think this is a great program. I didn't know about it until I was reached out about it last year, and then I've kind of told my friends. I think a good way to bring awareness to it is go to those clubs, RSOs, Greek Life, because those are the students that are more active. They're on campus. They're more likely to be going out into the community or just out with other not SGM, I don't know, wrong mindset, wrong hat. But I think if we just go and talk, sometimes they are vulnerable conversations, but they're conversations that need to be had. So talking to those more involved campus groups, because then they'll tell their friends, and then the message spreads. But I think by starting with active students that are involved at UNF, they'll spread to the maybe not as active students.
Yeah, just to reiterate that point, conversations are definitely top priority, but if you're not comfortable with going to groups and talking to people you're not familiar with, simply talking to your roommate or your siblings or anyone you feel comfortable with just to start the conversation And with more confidence grows more connectivity with the world around you.
And, you know, I think this is a very interesting topic, but if I were a freshman at UNF, I don't think I would come to this room and sit alone. So finding groups of people rather than individually. And again, I think talking is better than reading. You can put the most fantastic flyer out there, but having a 10-minute conversation is going to be more informational and more beneficial than sending out mass emails or flyers. Not that flyers are bad, but just having those conversations and building those connections.
I also want to add that the UPD is always happy to come and address groups. I don't care how small the group is. If you have a group, whether it's Greek life or athletics or whatever, any type of group where you want safety tips or you want to know about sexual assault or whatever it is, we're happy to come. Either I'll come, the chief will come, or one of my detectives or officers will come out, and they'll be happy to share that information. I also, I'm very fortunate that I get up in front of the new parents, a new parent orientation, and part of my presentation is talking about this. So hopefully that will, through the parents, is trickling down to the students. But I really want to get our UPD folks in front of groups of students where we can share this info. And then finally, we have a class that's called RAD, and it's Rape Aggression Defense Training. And it's basically how to fight back and defend yourself if anyone ever attacks you. We have a couple of officers that go out, and it's primarily women come to this class, but it's open to anybody who wants to come. And we will put on a class and be happy to teach you that stuff.
And can I say one more thing? Yeah. I serve as a chapter president for my sorority, and we've had both the Women's Center and UPD come out. And the information they say is all public knowledge. It's all on their website, but students don't know to look for information. So just providing it to them in new resources, even though your website's updated and you're sending out emails, they just don't know to look for it or to keep an eye out. So that verbal conversation with the students, and then you're building a connection where a student might feel more comfortable to reach out to UPD or to go to the Women's Center because they've met that face. They haven't just seen it behind a screen.
I'll add one more thing. I know Whitney and I in the past have had conversations about bystander intervention training and how important that really is, and that empowers students to not only learn skills that they can use in a number of situations in dealing with their friends, but can help spread that word. And it's not just about sexual assault. It's about how to interact with your friends when they are exhibiting any kind of behavior that might be concerning or getting themselves in a position where you feel like you should intervene, but maybe it's awkward, maybe it's just uncomfortable. But it helps train people on how to interact in those situations without the awkwardness, without the uncomfortableness. And that's something I think as a university where hopefully we all care about each other and each other's well-being, that's really important for us to perpetuate over time, not just during the Red Zone program, but throughout the course of the rest of the year.
Thank you. Our next question is directed towards Tyler and Oscar. How can someone safely meet new people?
Well, I think, especially for college students, I think that meeting groups or meeting people on campus, when you're here, especially for freshmen, is a really great way. I think that establishing, friendships and kind of getting to know people when you first get on campus is really important to carry that on, and you get to sort of, have opportunities to get to know them. You see them around in class, you see them around on campus. And like I said, I think that basically also hanging around and getting in with groups of people that you know that are good people, have your best interests in mind, and that's not always the case sometimes, but putting yourself in situations, whether it be here on campus with a group, with an outside group of people that you feel comfortable in, and trying to meet people through them, meeting people in those kind of situations, I think is probably one of your better ways, especially for our young ladies, for meeting people and that you could potentially want to pursue a partnership with or some sort of thing like that. So I think that's Oscar.
Yeah, just to expand off that, I would just put it under the whole umbrella of organized events, because there's also organized events off campus if you don't want to feel like you're enclosed to the UNF campus. And the best thing about these events is that you pick and choose which ones you want to go to, which means those who are at the events will have similar interests to you. So I just think organized events are always the best way to meet new people.
And to kind of go off that as well, for going off campus as well, I think also while going out to the bars and going and kind of parties and events are fun. I would say try to avoid events when you're first meeting people that involve alcohol or anything else. You can't really get who a person is, especially the first time when you're meeting them if they're intoxicated, under the influence of something. And you want to be in, like I said, outward situations where you're, like I said, maybe not on campus, but you're in a good situation where you're not having anything affecting what somebody's personality or demeanor is like.
Thank you. Our next question is directed towards Amy. What can consent look like?
So we've already had some really good comments about consent, but I always like to go back to the tried and true acronym. It's called MOVES. You've probably heard it before, but it's just a good way to remember the key components of consent. It's mutual, it's ongoing, meaning it can be revoked at any time. It's verbal, an enthusiastic yes, it's enthusiastic, and it's sober. It's important to remember that no one can give consent when they are sober. You also can't really judge whether a person is giving consent if you are sober. So I think that that's sometimes where we go a little wrong in the consent framework, is it's not just I am giving you consent, it's that we are consenting, and it's a mutual ongoing process. So,
And I think you meant not sober. Is that it, as if people are not sober?
if people are, I'm sorry, if people are not sober, if people are under any kind of influence, they not only cannot give consent, but I think it's important to remember that they also can't really judge whether or not a person is giving consent.
Yes, yeah.
I like to tell people also, no means no. That's very clear. But just as importantly, no answer means no. Acquiescence, just giving up, that doesn't give somebody consent to engage in sexual intercourse with you. And that's something that I think is an important message to get out there, because I've actually had people say, well, I should have done more. I didn't say no. I froze up. I got scared. Well, the only thing that is consent is, like was said before, if you're of sound mind and you say yes, and you say yes freely, then that's consent. But no answer is just as important as no.
And we have had, many victims over the years who are survivors. I do like that term so much better. Who, are seeing us for the ramifications of what has happened to them, this trauma that's happened, and they hesitate to call it sexual assault or rape because, well, I shouldn't have asked him to come to my dorm room, or I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that, or we were in a relationship already. People think that you can't be abused within a relationship, which is so not true. So I just wanted to piggyback off what you said, that survivors tend to think that it's not really assault because I didn't say no, I didn't fight them off, which is not true.
And so to kind of keep going with that, you said the word ongoing, that consent, that's the O. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because does that mean that, like, ongoing throughout the week in that moment? What exactly does that mean?
The way I actually say this with my patients, we're just going to go ahead and say it. Everybody could be naked and still no is no. It stops right there. That's what ongoing consent looks like. It means that it can be revoked at any time. Because I know there are a lot of, specifically women, not that all sexual assault is male against female, because that's absolutely not true. But there are a lot of women specifically who think that if we've gotten to a certain point, we have to just keep going because my consent is implied, and that's not true at all. Sorry, I had to be a little more graphic to explain the ongoing part.
Appreciate it. Our next question is directed towards Whitney. Who can you talk to if you've been assaulted or you know someone who has?
If you've been assaulted, most times survivors go to their very trusted person first. So most times when we meet with them, they already have a friend there. So sometimes that's the first person. You could also talk to a confidential resource if you need a little bit more tools on how to navigate the situation. Most times student survivors don't share with their families, but if you feel like you've come from a good home where your parents will support you in your decision making, that is also a great place to share. But I would say if you're speaking and disclosing to someone that you have been sexually assaulted for the first time, go to someone you feel safe with, and like if you're exploring other resources, then talk to them about the resources you're exploring. Most times survivors already have like at least one person that they've already disclosed to prior to coming to us, or they're walking in and just figuring out if what happened is actually a sexual violence situation, and they're just coming for confirmation.
Thank you. Our next question is directed towards Amy. What does a healthy relationship look like?
So here's the middle-aged lady talking to you about your healthy relationships, right? It's easy for me to say. I've been married for 27 years. But my patients, my students, and my kids are all college students, so I do feel like I have a good grasp of what college life is like and meeting people. And a healthy relationship at a young age has to do with shared interests. It has to do with mutual respect. It has to do with open communication. I think that's sometimes where we go wrong with the sexual assault, is that we haven't fully communicated what each of our expectations are in this way. And young people think that it's kind of not cool to have that conversation ahead of time. That can be really great for your relationship. So I encourage you to have that open conversation so that you understand each other. And just a foundation of openness and trust and fun. That's what a healthy relationship looks like. It should make you better. It should not make you worse.
I love that answer. Does anyone else have anything to add about what their view of a healthy relationship should look like?
I was just going to add, I've been married a few years longer than you, that in a healthy relationship, that the other person accepts you for who you are, and you accept that person for who they are. And there's not a need or a feeling that I need to change or I need to do something different. It's we're in this together, but we know who each other is, and we appreciate and we love each other for that.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is directed towards Whitney and Alana. What are some common or uncommon red flags or warning signs to look for when it comes to sexual assault?
Common warning sign is someone who isn't respecting your boundaries. So if they're showing up at your residence hall when you're not wanting them there, they most likely will also not stop when you're saying that you're not interested in sex or something like that. Someone who's not respecting your boundaries. Someone who is feeding you alcohol. So if you're not making your own drinks at party, but this person is often like, take this shot, do this, do that. That is often the ways alcohol facilitated sexual assaults occur. So those are two things that you want to be mindful of. And then you also want to just be aware of who you're inviting into your spaces. Most time, perpetrators are friends of friends, and they're like hanging out. They may be flirty throughout the night and different things like that. And then things evolve to a battery. So those are some common red flags.
I don't have anything else to add. That was great.
Thank you. Our next question is directed again towards Amy. How do you go about setting boundaries with people?
I find that this is a common, I think all of the counselors up here will agree, this is a common mutual thread in survivors is perhaps a lack of boundaries. They don't even know what their boundaries are, much less communicate their boundaries. So especially if you have grown up in a household where you were responsible for other people's emotional well-being, if you were a people pleaser, can't say no, it's really hard for anyone else to respect your boundaries if you have not established them. So that takes a lot of work from the person to actually decide what are my boundaries. And then I had one other note here about boundaries. You're not responsible for another adult's opinions, thoughts, feelings. There's nothing that you're going to do that is going to, they're big grown adults, basically. And then learn your boundaries, communicate your boundaries. And that can be really hard if you come from a traumatic upbringing. So there's some work to do for potential victims. Because I'll say another thing, that people who maybe, I would say, I hate to say perpetrators, because sometimes this doesn't look like that, but perpetrators, even if it's unconscious, they know who is vulnerable. So they're not going to try to do this with someone who has intact boundaries. It's too hard.
And one thing I want to add to that, I have a lot of clients come in, a lot of younger clients, that they don't know what a boundary is. They hear it all the time, social media, all of this stuff. It's the thing to talk about. But they don't necessarily know what that is. And then once we talk about, boundaries, standards you have for yourself, things that where you stay comfortable, that you're not going to let someone kind of violate that. It's the idea of, well, I don't want to make someone mad. I don't want someone to be upset with me because I'm essentially telling them, no, they can't do this. So one thing we often like to say is someone who is upset with you for setting a boundary that is healthy for you is someone who benefited from you having none. So that idea of it's never your fault if someone's upset with you, it's more a reflection of them than you.
I have a comment. It's back from the previous question, but another red flag to look for is predatory helpfulness. We've seen a lot of first-year students experience victimization because the upperclassmen wanted to show them around campus or invite them to that party. So that's another thing to be mindful of.
Thank you. And to go back to the boundary question, what does a healthy boundary look like, or what even is a can you elaborate on boundaries?
So I would say it's you can make like specific boundaries, like we're not having sex tonight. That's one version of a boundary. But a lot of times boundaries are a little bit more gray than that, so I can understand why maybe we're not being clear. But a boundary is I am not going to take responsibility for your thoughts and opinions about what is best for me. That is the best way that I can describe a boundary, except for just the very specific boundary of I'm okay with this, but we're stopping here. That's another example of a boundary. And then if you know that's best for yourself, then you have to have the confidence to stick with that. And I think the confidence is sometimes the kicker. Yeah.
Thank you. I agree with that. Our next question is directed towards Oscar and Emily. How can you be a positive bystander in these types of situations?
I'll start. So the bystander effect, I feel like we all know the definition, but it's when you see something and you just assume something else is going on. So not to be a bystander, if you see something going on and you think someone already's reported it, like you're walking home from the bars and you see someone laying on the floor and you assume, oh, someone's already taking care of them. Follow up, but it's okay to have someone double check in. I don't know what else. Do you want to go?
Yeah. The situations where people they can't put their finger on what's wrong. They think something's wrong, but they're not sure. It never hurts to ask. Pull who you think who's in trouble aside. Just ask them if they're okay. Worst case scenario, do a drug test on them. Make sure they're able to look after themselves. And you don't have to know the person. It's the bystander's role to make sure that the community's safe, and who knows, you might be a hero in that situation. So it never hurts to ask.
And we've talked about a gut feeling a lot today. If you're hanging out with a friend and say it's Saturday morning and you went out Friday night and they're just a little off, you can ask what's going on. They might not open up, but follow up maybe Monday morning if you still see something's on, and just be there for a friend. But if you have a gut feeling, that you have a gut feeling for a reason. So just check in on the people around you, even if you're not close with them.
And if you're afraid for your safety, some people may not be comfortable acting as a bystander because they're afraid of the situation. If you are afraid and you see something and it feels off, I would just encourage you to call the UPD. Let us come check it out for you. Because the worst that happens is maybe we get there and we give somebody a ride back to their dorm room. But at least we're able to come and check it out and make sure that there's not some type of criminal behavior going on.
And also, I think especially for our male students, and especially that if you do, or if you're in a situation and you feel like something's getting out of control with someone in your group, you're just seeing something out, please say something. You're not ruining that person's night. You'd rather ruin some person's night if you have to by protecting them and making sure that they're not putting themselves in a situation. Don't just assume that they're going to be all right, because they could potentially not be. So it's important that if you see someone, especially a young lady or someone that you're around that's in a situation potentially with another male individual, please step in and make sure that they're comfortable, because that's just as important as being there to listen to someone after something happens, and you'd rather help prevent it than to be listening to something after it happens. So,
and I think Oscar made a good point that you would rather be wrong than not intervene, and it's okay if somebody gets a little mad at you, right? You would rather do that than let something awful happen to someone that you maybe were the last person that could intervene.
And sometimes we worry about, you don't want to embarrass someone. If they're embarrassed for 5 seconds on like maybe how they're acting, or if you like remove them from the situation, that 5 seconds is gonna like oversee what could happen or what you're helping prevent. Even if nothing does happen, it's 5 seconds.
Thank you. And a couple questions just came in. The first one goes directly relates, but what if I know something happened to my friend but they don't want me to share?
You don't share. Always driven by the survivor. If you think that they need help, you can try to find an avenue for resources for them, but it's always up to them whether or not they report. And there are many, many survivors who never report, and that has to be honored and respected by their family and their healthcare providers. That always has to be driven by the survivor only. It doesn't matter what you think they should do.
And if you need the tools, you can always talk to someone who has the resources to assist you with assisting your friend.
So we should not pressure them to report.
I think it's a little tricky, honestly, the situation. I totally get what's being said, but when it comes to that, if you feel like somebody has gone through that, you don't have to, again, like we've talked about tonight, you don't have to go directly to, let's call 911 and get the police involved. You could maybe try to gently steer that person toward maybe reporting to Title IX or to somebody to start getting the resources. And then we could do the reporting later and make sure that we're doing what we have to do, but maybe get that person resources. But I'm not saying don't respect someone's wishes. I'm just saying maybe there's some gentle persuasion that you can do as well.
I'm even thinking of the idea of letting this friend know, like validating what happened, like this was not okay what happened to you. I think this may be something that could, reach out to another agency on campus, like what happened to you shouldn't have happened to you. But again, validating that this is their autonomy, this is their choice, this happened to them and only them, to go forward with that. But just letting them know, like, you're, for them or helping them in that way. And if they do change their mind, you're there for them.
And it is important to bring up again, if it's not peer-to-peer, if it's a student reporting to a faculty or staff, there is no choice. Then they are bound, they have to report that to Title IX.
And I just wanted to add, like Deputy Chief Adam Brown and I are on a lot of these panels and talk to the Spinnaker, and you're both on the same page as far as that goes. So you have to find a balance between honoring the survivor's autonomy and also potentially preventing this from happening again, which is where Deputy Chief Brown is coming from. And it's a very valid point, but it's not solely on the onus of the survivor.
I do have more of a question, because I know a lot of our incoming freshmen are not always 18. So this is more a question for, is there mandatory reporting if they are under 18 and they tell a roommate or a friend?
Yeah, if they're 17, then we break confidentiality because they're a vulnerable person. And it has to be reported to DCF.
But does that also apply to, like, if they tell a roommate? Does the roommate do they have to report?
Now, the roommate, no. But as a employee, we could be fined for not reporting.
I want to qualify that for healthcare because with the Florida statutes, even students under 18, their healthcare is still confidential and private if it's related to the reproductive health care. So I cannot and will not share any information with parents if they call. I can't share it. So that's a little bit different. Just keeping in mind that if students are 17, your reproductive health is still protected under current Florida statutes.
Thank you. Our next question that came in goes a little bit back to the boundaries, but do healthy habits happen right away? How can I feel more comfortable with these safe habits, aka how do we practice? I can repeat the question if I need to. Do healthy habits happen right away? That's the first part of the question. How can I feel more comfortable with these safe habits?
I would say they don't happen right away, and I think that's okay. It's something that it's a practice, and eventually it becomes a habit, and then it becomes routine. But it can be uncomfortable starting something new, and having this new knowledge, and it may go against some things you're used to doing. If calling out a friend for behavior that is maybe unsafe, and what kind of position that puts you in your friendship. But just practicing that and just continuing it, eventually it does become easier.
And I think especially for people that are younger and starting out in new relationships, I think that when you're starting something like that, I think communicating with your partner or your interest about what you are comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, it can't stop everything, but it can set those boundaries like we spoke about earlier and kind of hopefully prevent these things from escalating. So I think communicating is something that doesn't always happen, but I think that's a really important part to establishing healthy boundaries, so it just becomes part of your regular either relationship habits or just kind of your general lifestyle relationship things going forward. So.
And kind of to add into that, when it comes to habits and boundaries, I think one of the first things to do is when you're exploring what that looks like for you is just to check in with yourself. How am I feeling in these situations? How does this make me feel when I'm put in this situation? And just checking in, and it doesn't have to be if someone else has a different boundary or they're okay with this, does not mean you have to be okay with it. So it really just starts with you and what feels good to you and what feels safe to you.
I was going to say in a really broad way, I think, it's partly developing your own identity and your independence, which I'm not sure is a process that ever stops. So it's totally ongoing all the time. But a lot of particularly younger students come in and they want to fit in and they want to make friends and they don't want to alienate people and they might want to just go with the flow. And sometimes it's hard to say, no, this isn't for me. I don't feel comfortable doing this. This is not who I am. But those are the kinds of questions that they need to be asking is who am I? What is important to me? What do I value? And like I said, I think I'm still doing that myself, and I'm a lot older than most of our students.
So how can we do that? How can we start that conversation, and how do we practice that?
You're asking me?
Or anybody.
Again, I think it's just some self-analysis kind of, kind of understanding who you are as a person and what's important to you. There's other ways of doing that, but it starts with yourself.
I think that some of these safety behaviors that we're talking about are not something you need to warm up to or get used to. You just need to implement them. And then the boundaries that we're talking about, these kind of fluffy boundaries will come. But the behaviors, going out with people and making a plan for the end of the night, not going home with someone you just met, all of those things to keep yourself safe, I think we don't need to think too much about that. We need to just do those things in order to keep yourself safe. And then the logic of it will come later.
I think it starts with education, and that's what we're doing tonight. And when everyone takes this message in and sets their own personal boundaries, then you just have to, I'd almost say fake it till you make it. You just, you put those habits into place. You just implement them as best you can, and you stay true to them.
And we've said self-reflecting a lot. You come to college and there's a lot of new experiences from high school inside and outside the classroom, and a lot of things that your friends are doing that you might have not experienced before or thought about experience or you're not comfortable doing. And there is like the fear of fitting in. So I think reflecting on who you're around and what they're doing, and if you're comfortable doing it, and if you're comfortable trying new things, or if you're trying new things just because you want to fit in. I think that's a big thing that you should think about before going out to that event or hanging out with that friend group.
Thank you. We had another question come in, and this is for anyone can answer. It can be hard to do the right thing, especially in group situations like organizations or teams. So maybe that those people can speak to this. Do y'all have any advice?
I think if you go to the right person, you can keep things anonymous or discreet. I know in like a club setting, or I did sports in high school, and if you see something, you don't want to disrupt the kind of energy of the team or just the dynamic. You don't want to make that person feel alienated, but it is important to hold people accountable. So going to a coach, going to an advisor, going to someone rather than just blasting it through social media can kind of protect you while keeping other people safe.
Yeah, I would say lead by example. Be the person that your teammates look up to. Be the person that your friends look up to. Just continue to pursue being the right person, doing the right thing.
I don't really know that people, is that the kind of person that you want representing your team anyway? What are you really losing by taking the safety of another person seriously? There's not really much to be lost except maybe a little bit of, little mud on the face of your team or your organization. I think that will ultimately come out much, much better.
Good point.
I was going to say, and kind of going off of what you two said, it's kind of like leading by example and starting that. And then I think that's how standards are created. That's how we shift images, is when enough people stand up and lead by example and say, this is not okay, this is kind of what we're going to be doing, these are expectations. Then we can kind of shift some of those kind of not so great images about certain groups and overall shift the culture on this campus.
I just had one more thought. So if the question was, the way I'm hearing the question is, how do I stand up and do the right thing and be the upstander or the bystander when it might cost a group member of mine, a team member, a club member, whatever? I take that back. Like, what will be lost? A lot could be lost. They could lose their scholarship. They could get kicked out of school. They could have criminal charges. There's a lot that can be lost. But I think what you need to remember is what is lost if you don't intervene. There is so much long-term suffering that can be avoided if we can prevent some of these assaults. I think you need to see what that looks like in a person's life to know that it's worth it to intervene. So I just wanted to go back and clarify myself. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Our next question is directed towards Tyler. How do drugs and alcohol play a role in sexual assault?
Well, I just think that drugs and alcohol don't play a positive role in anything. I think that any time that you're throwing yourself in a situation where you're either around people that are under the influence of a substance, could be alcohol, drugs, or you are engaging in those activities yourself, you are not in your 100% solid state of mind. Even people that have the best morals and the best kind of personality, best ideals about themselves can make horrible decisions when they're drinking, using drugs, and all it takes is one clouded judgment decision to ruin somebody's life, to ruin your life. So I think that anytime that you're putting yourself in a position where drugs and alcohol are present, you have to be extremely careful. If you're at a party like Emily and Oscar talked about earlier, cover your drink. Do not don't drink alcohol that's out of a common source container, like a water jug, out of a punch bowl, whatever it may be. You just don't know what someone has put in there. You don't have any control of how that's being served. And just also don't be around people that you either know that make poor decisions when they're under the influence, or, like you said, be safe when you're around. If you do find yourself in a situation where drugs and alcohol are present, put yourself around people that you can trust, and put yourself around people that you know that if something would happen, that they would have your best interest in mind and can also get you out of that situation in a safe way. But like you said, drugs and alcohol don't play a good part in anything, so I think that keeping yourselves out of those situations can really lower your chances of having to experience something, traumatic like that. So,
thank you. Our next question is directed towards Adam. Are there certain areas in Jacksonville or types of areas in general that you notice this type of behavior happening more frequently?
No, not certain places. I mean, Jacksonville's huge. It's 840 some odd square miles. I think it's the largest city in the continental U.S. and land area. I believe that's still correct. And, UNF, the thing that I always like to tell people is we have a very safe campus, and I'm happy for that. But we're surrounded by a lot of bad stuff. I'm not going to say, there's just one area that's bad. You've got pockets, and it just depends on where you go. And so those safety habits that we were talking about before, about going out in groups, staying in well-lit areas, and going to places that seem safe, those are all important to remember, because we all know when we're going into a neighborhood and it's a little bit sketchy. I mean, you can tell, and if you find yourself in that situation, just turn around and get out of there. Don't go there.
and I think that especially going off of what Adam said, with how Jacksonville is, this is not a college town. We're not in a place where students show up and it's, just la la land, that everything's perfect and, that there's no crime. I mean, anywhere that you go in Jacksonville, you're going to be around, not just college students, but the beach bars, for example, downtown, Riverside. All those bars and restaurants are frequented by everyone that lives in Jacksonville. And, you really have to be careful and have your surroundings, have your wits about you when you're out, because like you said, you're not just with 18 to 22-year-old kids, you're with everybody. And there's people that go out and do not have your best interest in mind and want to put you in bad situations. So just because you're going out to a spot where you feel comfortable doesn't mean that things can't happen, because like you said, that's just a lot of people, a lot of area, and a lot of things can happen. So.
And even traditional college towns, Gainesville, Tallahassee, those kind of places, there's all kinds of stuff that can and does happen. And if you're familiar with it, there was just a horrific crime at the University of Wisconsin-Madison where a girl was almost killed. She was sexually assaulted, and they've thankfully arrested somebody. And I've been there. It's a college town, but things happen. So again, we just have to be careful. We have to be alert and try to use good judgment when we're out and about.
I just wanted to second your point that was a fantastic point. And I even was thinking of how many people frequent these spaces that college kids go to with not the best intentions in mind, wanting to take advantage of people that may not know better, that may be drinking a lot more. So I think that's really great to point out.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is directed towards Tom. What are examples of supportive measures that we can offer to friends or acquaintances who are going through this?
Sure. Let me backtrack a little bit. When an incident is reported to the EOI office typically, or it could be to the victim's advocate or elsewhere, the Dean of Students' office is generally contacted. Rachel is sitting back there, she's the dean. And we're the ones that coordinate between her and I, usually the what's called the supportive measures that are offered to a student. The idea of supportive measures is that we have an obligation, we would do this anyway, I hope, but we have an obligation through the law to provide an environment that's safe, that's stable, that provides equal access to everybody to their same educational resources. So that's the impetus for this, or that's the direction that we go in. So what we do is we work with the individuals involved to make sure that they have access to their classes, access to their residences, whatever else the case might be, but in a safe and stable way. So that might mean that if the alleged perpetrator and the survivor are in the same classroom, we might move one of them from one class to a section to another or something like that. We might, if they're in the same residence hall, move somebody out of that residence hall so that they're not constantly with each other and feeling uncomfortable because of that or feeling threatened. We might get them extensions on assignments or allow them to miss, or ask the professors, I should say, to allow them to miss some of their classes because only the professors can make that decision. We also would work with them to coordinate resources such as counseling or access to health services. If it came down to it and the person felt that they could not successfully complete the semester, we would also work with them to pursue what fits currently under the category of a medical withdrawal so that they could leave without financial or academic penalty. And those are some of the things. Escorts around campus, additional security possibly, are some of the things we've done in the past. But again, the idea is to make sure that you're safe on campus and that you're as comfortable as you could possibly be without having interaction with that other people. And the one I didn't say was a no contact order, which is a really common one, which is just a directive to both individuals to not have any kind of contact with each other, including indirect contact through friends, through social media, or those kinds of things.
Thank you. Our next question that came in is directed towards anyone, so anyone can answer. But we've talked a lot tonight about sexual violence and battery and penetrating, but is there a spectrum of sexual violence, or is it just those sort of more egregious things?
Well, I'll start it off with the Clary Act. There's 3 ways that we report, and it would be a sexual assault, a fondling, or incest. That's how it's reported through Clary. Florida state statutes, there are different crimes associated with different acts, but they're all heinous and they all be followed up the same way.
Sexual assault is an umbrella if in layman's terms. So it could be like sexual exploitation. So if a person sends a nude and that person is now like blackmailing or asking for money, that could be considered sexual exploitation. Fondling, sexual battery, which is rape. I think those are the 3 umbrellas that would be considered sexual assault if we're talking about touching and different things. But most time when people say they're sexually assaulted, what they're really trying to say is they were raped, and we would have to discuss definitions. Was it digital? Was it vaginal? Was it with an object? Because that's also included in that statute.
And oral can be included in there as well if they force that. That can also be included. But yeah, it just depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking Florida state statutes, the main ones that we would look at would be, like Whitney said, sexual battery. And a lot of times what's reported to us as a sexual battery, like I said at the very beginning, it could be what we would consider a battery. And what we're talking about, a simple battery, and what we're talking about is if someone grabs someone's breast against their will. I know it sounds like that should be considered sexual assault, but just in the state of Florida, in the eyes of the state statutes, it's not. It's a battery. So we have to follow that. It's very specific.
I was actually going to touch base on that. We had a case, and I was at the state attorney's office, where we call them victims as well, came in and stated that a person had previously sexually assaulted her years before, saw her on a college campus, and kissed her without her consent. That came in as a general misdemeanor, and that was a simple battery. So this idea that it may not fall under the sexual assault umbrella, but it is still something that you can report. Really any unwanted contact would then maybe fall under a battery, but I still think that's important to know. That is something you can report as well.
And I wouldn't get hung up on the exact title. If you have experienced something like this and you report it to us, then we're going to figure all that out through our investigation. It's not, what's important is to know that you've gone through an experience like this, you need to get help, and then we're going to help you get the help that you need.
And then I'd like to take it back to intimate partner violence, which we talked about earlier, which does not always have to be sexual abuse. It can be physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial control and manipulation. We use a screening tool in the clinic for all visits, especially well visits. It's called the HIT screen for domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And HITS stands for hurts, insult, threaten, or scream. So there doesn't have to be a sexual nature to the assault for it to be very damaging. So it's important to remember that part.
Thank you. And that's kind of what the question was alluding to is, you know, is like making a sexual joke, is that considered sexual violence? And is that something that is a personal thing, or is that something I could report? Or is it just these more bigger?
As far as UPD getting involved, making an off-color joke like that is not going to be considered sexual assault.
But if you look at the university regulations and the code of conduct, which is broader in terms of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, something like that, sexual harassment, making comments repeatedly, or severe, pervasive, and what's the other word? I'm blanking on it at the minute. Persistent, thank you. Or some of those other behaviors certainly would be. Exposing yourself to somebody else would be, for instance, might not be sexual assault, but it would still be a violation of the regulation. A lot of what I've interacted with in the past has actually been more sexual harassment comments, sometimes touching inappropriately, but not what would fall under the umbrella of sexual assault. But we would address that too, not necessarily through UPD, but through EOI and the Student Conduct Office or other means.
I think something important to keep in mind, I'm sorry if to keep in mind is that all the different offices at this table, we work very well together. We all know each other. I may get a call, and I know it's not going to be a UPD call, and I may call Student Conduct or the Dean of Students office and say, hey, this might be better for you guys. I mean, we work very well to make sure that whoever the victim or survivor or the person, the complainant is, make sure that they get the help that they need.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of again, going off of that, like our goal here is just to create a safe environment that even if it's something you're like, again, we've talked about, we're not sure if this was, you know, legal terms, assault or something like this, but it was something that made you uncomfortable, that's something that made you feel scared, and it's maybe happening often. Always come forward if you feel comfortable. It's always worth it. Even if we determine, you know, we pass it off to the right department, it's always worth coming forward.
Thank you. Well, those are all of the questions that we have right now. Does anyone from the audience have any questions for our panel members? Yes?
I know you mentioned that you guys have like a self-defense class. What types of self-defense are allowed in your campus?
What do you mean, what types of weapons? Is that what you're asking? Or, well, you can have the small little canister of pepper spray. Those are okay. Firearms are not okay. Tasers. If it fires a dart and it's going to come out of the gun and into your skin, those are a no-go. But you know, you can. What I always tell the parents at the new parent orientation, a lot of people that I see, they'll have the very small little pepper spray canisters on the keychains. You'll be okay with that.
And just to continue with answering that question, on our the Dean of Students website, we have our student code of conduct, and there is like the specifics of what you're not allowed to have if you want to visit our website, the code of conduct.
There's also new like keychains that have a light on them. I think they're called birdies. But it's kind of like a hook, so you can put it right on your keychain, and when you pull it open, it makes a very, very loud noise and flashes very bright. Those are allowed, and those would like shock anybody. So sometimes with pepper spray, it can be a little scary because if someone overpowers you, they could use it against you. But this is just sound. So open it, practice it, so you know how loud it is. But it's a great thing, and it's hard to get turned against you as well.
And then I would say, I was actually going to mention the birdies because my
Birdies, right?
yes, my daughter has one at FSU. But so they make a loud noise. They make a lot of blinking light. Just if you hear that and you don't feel confident enough to respond to that, call somebody else. Those are only effective if somebody responds. So we just have to look after each other in that way.
And they're not expensive, so pull it and run and let the noise stay behind.
Any other questions?
While we're talking about responding to like the sounds and everything, I just want to throw one thing out there. If I know sometimes it's hard to do, but if you think something's going on campus and you see a suspect, you see a person that is suspicious to you, if you can get a license tag for us, that is huge, because a lot of times we'll have a really good description and then no tag, and then thankfully a lot of times we can still find them anyway. But remembering in the heat of the moment to get that license tag, that's a big deal for us if you can do that.
And this just popped into my brain as you were talking, but the blue lights on campus, can you talk to us a little bit more about those?
Absolutely. The blue lights that you see all over campus, if you go up to one and you push a button, you're going to be connected immediately with the UPD comm center. We have people in there. That's the communication center, sorry. People are in there 24/7, 365 days a year. And if you push that button, they're going to speak to you, and they will also, let's just say you were incapacitated and all you could do is push the button, we're still going to know where you are. They also have inside some of the buildings the little silver boxes. It does the same thing. It goes directly to UPD. And then on your Safe Ospreys app, there's a mobile blue light. And that's the same kind of a thing where you hit that and you can be connected directly to the comm center and talk to us.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience or comments from the panelists? Yes.
Apologies if this question was already answered or mentioned before. What kind of inspired you to get yourself involved in this sort of community? Like, was there any sort of events, or was it just wanting to help others?
Well, these are the ladies who organize the Red Zone, but I know why they organize the Red Zone, because there is a big uptick in the amount of sexual assault on college campuses between the start of the school year and Thanksgiving, especially among first time in college. So 1 in 4 women in college have been sexually assaulted, which is too high. And we were all seeing the same things. And so I applaud them again for getting this started. But we all work to prevent sexual assault and for sexual assault victims, but that's only one part of what we do. So we come together once a year for the Red Zone. So I guess it is a community. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to, I guess, add a little bit to that. Yeah, so these are, I don't think you were here at the very beginning, but as Amy mentioned, the Red Zone, that is what the Red Zone references, and these are just different campus partners who do, like she said, are involved with victims or responding students in these situations, and so we just want the campus to know more about how to prevent sexual assault and just be more aware that it does happen everywhere. So. Any other questions? Yes.
Just before I even ask, if you are sexually assaulted, it's because someone sexually assaulted you. It's not because you did this. That's not the cause and effect. So that's not what I'm asking. But I know that it's so prevalent: sexual assault, sexual harassment, violence, coercion, that whole umbrella, and it's been around like forever, since the dawn of time. And there are so many policies, and you guys are putting these things to protect it and fight against it. But if you guys could think of, and this is for anybody, because you guys represent a lot of different people, even just people our age, older, law enforcement, medical. Is there something that you see that, like, wow, if we could just kind of fix this problem, this is something that we're always seeing. Is there something that you are noticing, or something that, man, if we could just change? Do you guys see that, or is there anything that you wish, like, man, if we could just? Is there anything that you guys see just in your work, in your?
I'm going to take a stab at this one just from what I see from a healthcare perspective and the assault victims that I myself have cared for in the student health clinic. If I could remove one piece that would make this a lot better, it is the excess use of drugs and alcohol. That would solve a lot of these issues. Not for victims and perpetrators, who sometimes are too drunk to know they're perpetrators, let's be honest. They're not reading the room very well, and maybe they're very sexually inexperienced, and don't really understand what healthy boundaries and consent looks like. So they're not intending sometimes to rape anybody. A lot of times they will tell the officers that they thought it was consensual. So I feel like they would be more aware of themselves if they were not under the influence of drugs and alcohol, especially at a very young age.
And I think, from my perspective at least, obviously representing fraternity and sorority life, that's a big issue across the country that a lot of organizations unfortunately face is sexual assault. And I think that one of the biggest problems, going off of what you said, is drug and alcohol consumption, and also an absence of any sort of risk management program or some sort of precursor to setting up standards that either social events or just that these members in the chapters need to operate under. I think that when you mix in large groups of men and women where there's drugs and alcohol present, even though it's not supposed to be there, you're going to have a lot of people making a lot of dumb choices. And I think that really showing people the consequences of not having safe practices in place and opening themselves up to potentially a lot of stuff going wrong to leading into that, I think that would be the biggest thing in helping to reduce it, is just educating and putting safe practices in place so that people have safeguards to fall back on.
Sorry.
I also, no problem. I think, not to sound too parochial here, but there's a breakdown way before the drugs and alcohol starts, and it's in the family, in the home, and people just are not taught to respect each other and to love each other and not do these kind of things. And some people are not taught right and wrong, or they're mirroring bad behavior that they saw growing up in their home or in their extended families. And I would just love to see more parents really teaching their kids from a very early age, this is right, this is wrong, this is how you act, this is how you treat people. And I'm just seeing less and less of it. I think that's an issue.
Yeah, and I was coming from a slightly similar point of view, which is, we're a microcosm of a larger community. What happens around us is happening on campus too. But the advantage that we could have is that as a smaller community, if we developed more of a sense of community, if we got to know each other better, if we respected each other more, if we cared for each other more, we could reduce the incidence of sexual assault, at least on the campus, I think.
I had one more thing. If I'm thinking about things I could pluck out, I would pluck out the online hookup culture, where you get on an app, you meet somebody, you go out with them. That is a recipe for assault. So, and that, my kids' friends tell me that that's becoming the way you meet people, which is alarming and dangerous. So I wish that was not part of the culture. And a lot of students don't really like that or want to do that. They think that's what they're supposed to be doing. So maybe changing that culture would help.
I think also, going off, I keep piggybacking off your points, but I think also if you're intending on going out, whether it be to a bar or something like that, eliminating sort of the idea in your brain of creating a one-night stand situation. I think that if you're going out to the bars with the sole purpose of trying to meet somebody, to try to have some sort of engage in some activity with somebody, I think that it opens up a lot of opportunities for something to go way wrong. And like you said, I think that mindset and that online hookup sort of like one night stand mentality is something that I think really charges those negative problems that happen.
Thank you. So we will go ahead and wrap up, but I just want to say thank you all for coming. This was wonderful, and thank you so much to our panelists for answering all the questions in a wonderful way. It is 5 till 8, so if you all will stick around for another 5 or so minutes, but y'all are welcome to leave. But thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.